Ferrari may have just changed the entire balance of power hours before the first race of the season. Because inside the paddock in Melbourne, a very specific rumor has started spreading among engineers and rival teams. Ferrari did not just arrive with the same car from Bahrain. They arrived with a refined engine, a reworked exhaust system, and a rear aerodynamic concept that could unlock up to 2/10 per lap in the exact type of corners that dominate the Australian circuit. But here is what makes this situation even more intriguing. Fred Vasseur did not announce a major upgrade. Ferrari did not reveal a new specification publicly. Instead, these changes appeared quietly, inside the rear of the SF26. A smaller, faster responding turbo, a redesigned exhaust flow feeding the diffuser, and hybrid energy maps specifically tuned for Albert Park. And when those three elements work together, the result can completely transform how a car accelerates out of slow corners. Which is exactly where races in Melbourne are won. Some teams in the paddock are already asking the same question. Did Ferrari just unlock a performance advantage that nobody saw coming? Because if these leaks are accurate, the Ferrari we are about to see in Australia may be very different from the one that tested in Bahrain. And if that is true, the first Grand Prix of the season might start with a shock. Subscribe now, because what Ferrari has prepared for Australia could change everything before the lights even go out. The first thing you need to understand about Ferrari's situation in Australia is this. The SF26 arriving in Melbourne is not a new car. But that does not mean it is the same car we saw in Bahrain. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. Because Ferrari's engineers did not focus on adding visible parts for the first race of the season. They focused on refining how the car generates performance, especially at the rear of the car. During the Bahrain tests, Ferrari already introduced the aerodynamic concept that defines the SF26. A powerful diffuser, a very aggressive exhaust positioning, and a rotating rear wing concept known inside the paddock as the flip wing. Those three elements were designed to work together as a single aerodynamic system. And for Australia, Ferrari has refined how that system interacts with the engine. The key detail lies in how the exhaust gases leave the engine and travel toward the diffuser. Ferrari engineers have modified the flow path around the exhaust outlet and the surrounding bodywork. The objective is simple. Guide the extremely hot exhaust gases directly into the diffuser expansion zone. When that happens, those gases energize the airflow passing under the car. That extra energy increases aerodynamic efficiency exactly when the driver accelerates out of corners. And that improvement matters enormously in Australia. Albert Park is a circuit where traction defines lap time. Several corners force drivers to slow down dramatically before accelerating into long straight sections. If the rear of the car produces more stability during that acceleration phase, the driver can apply throttle earlier. Earlier throttle means higher speed entering the straight. And that advantage continues for hundreds of meters. Ferrari engineers estimate that the refined exhaust and diffuser interaction could deliver roughly 2/10 of a second per lap in medium-speed traction zones. 2/10 might sound small, but in modern Formula 1, that difference can separate pole position from the third row of the grid. But the aerodynamic changes are only one part of the story. Because Ferrari also brought a fresh race specification of the 067/6 power unit to Australia. And inside that engine, one very important component has been refined. The turbocharger. Ferrari has reportedly introduced a smaller, more responsive turbine developed with Honeywell. This turbine reacts faster when the driver presses the throttle, which means the engine builds boost pressure more quickly. In simple terms, less delay between throttle input and acceleration, less turbo lag, and that translates directly into stronger traction out of slow corners. Think about corners like turn 3 or turn 13 in Melbourne. Both require drivers to slow the car significantly before accelerating again. If the turbo responds even a fraction of a second faster, the car gains speed earlier. And once that speed advantage begins, it compounds down the straight. That is why Ferrari's engine refinement is so important for this circuit. But there is another layer to these upgrades that most fans never see. Energy management. Because the hybrid system inside a Formula 1 car is just as important as the combustion engine itself. The ERS system stores electrical energy during braking, then releases that energy to provide additional power when needed. But that power cannot simply be used everywhere. Engineers must decide exactly where the energy is deployed during each lap. Too much deployment early in the lap, and the battery empties before the final straight. Too little, and the driver cannot defend against overtakes. So Ferrari engineers spent a significant amount of time refining the energy deployment maps for the Australian circuit. These maps control how the hybrid system releases power during acceleration zones. And according to reports from the Bahrain long runs, Ferrari's energy delivery looked extremely consistent. There were no signs of early clipping. No sudden drop in electrical power near the end of the straights. That kind of stability becomes incredibly valuable during long race stints, because it allows the driver to attack repeatedly without worrying about running out of hybrid energy. And that is exactly the type of performance Ferrari has been trying to achieve for several seasons. But here is where the story becomes even more interesting. Because these improvements are not only the result of Ferrari's engineers, they are also the result of a new voice inside the team, Lewis Hamilton. And according to several sources inside the Ferrari technical group, Hamilton's feedback has already influenced key areas of how the SF26 behaves under braking and energy recovery. Which leads to a much deeper story about how this car was actually developed. A story that could explain why Ferrari suddenly looks far more competitive just hours before the first Grand Prix of the season. But to really understand why Ferrari suddenly looks more dangerous heading into Australia, you have to look at what changed inside the team during the development of the SF26. Because this car was not designed in the same way as previous Ferraris. For the first time in years, the technical direction of the project was influenced by two completely different driving styles. Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. That combination forced Ferrari engineers to rethink something fundamental: the operating window of the car. In previous seasons, Ferrari often produced cars that were extremely fast, but very sensitive. They had a narrow setup window. When everything worked perfectly, the performance was incredible. But if the balance moved slightly outside that window, the car quickly became difficult to drive. That is something Hamilton immediately focused on when he joined the development process. His feedback centered around three very specific areas: braking stability, hybrid energy control, and rear traction during long race stints. Engineers working on the project describe Hamilton's approach as extremely methodical. Instead of chasing a single fast lap, he pushed the team to explore different energy maps and braking distributions that would keep the car stable over long runs. In other words, he was not just trying to make the Ferrari faster. He was trying to make it more usable. That philosophy had a direct influence on how the hybrid system of the 067/6 engine is calibrated. Because one of the most delicate moments in a Formula One lap happens during braking. At that moment, the car is not only slowing down using mechanical brakes. It is also harvesting energy through the hybrid system. If that energy recovery is too aggressive, the rear axle can become unstable. If it is too weak, the car loses valuable electrical energy. Hamilton's feedback helped Ferrari refine the balance between those two systems. The result is a braking phase that feels much more predictable for the driver, which allows them to attack heavy braking zones with greater confidence. And in Melbourne, that is incredibly important. Albert Park includes several very heavy braking points. Drivers go from very high speed down to slow corners where traction becomes critical. If the car remains stable during those moments, the driver can brake later, rotate the car more aggressively, and accelerate earlier out of the corner. That sequence alone can define an entire lap. But Ferrari's engineers were careful not to abandon the core philosophy that Charles Leclerc prefers. Leclerc has always been extremely fast with a car that has strong front-end grip. He likes a car that rotates aggressively at corner entry. That type of setup can produce incredible qualifying laps, but it can also make the car nervous during long runs. So the challenge for Ferrari was clear: create a car that could satisfy both drivers. And surprisingly, early indications suggest they may have succeeded. During the Bahrain tests, Leclerc appeared capable of extracting very strong peak performance from the SF26. But Hamilton looked particularly impressive during long runs. His lap times were extremely consistent. His tire degradation appeared controlled. And his energy deployment remained stable across multiple laps. That combination is exactly what Ferrari has been missing in recent seasons. Because Formula One races are rarely decided by a single fast lap. They are decided by consistency. By how well a car maintains its performance across an entire stint. And according to several technical analyses from the Bahrain data, the SF26 looked like one of the most balanced cars in the field during those longer runs. But there is still one element of uncertainty surrounding Ferrari heading into Australia: temperature. Because while the upgrades around the exhaust and diffuser improve traction and downforce, they also concentrate a lot of heat in the rear of the car. And if the track temperature rises too much, the rear tires could begin to overheat. That would immediately reduce traction. And on a circuit like Albert Park, losing traction can destroy lap time. This is why Ferrari engineers have spent so much time working on cooling optimization for this race. Side pod airflow, rear bodywork ventilation, and engine mapping designed to control thermal load. All of these elements will determine whether the SF26 can operate inside its ideal performance window. If Ferrari finds that window, then the story of the Australian Grand Prix could become very interesting. Because the upgrades introduced by Vasseur are not designed for headlines. They are designed for efficiency. A more responsive turbo. A diffuser that works harder during acceleration. More stable energy deployment. And a car that can adapt to two very different drivers. Individually, each of these improvements might look small. But together, they could form something much more significant. A Ferrari capable of fighting at the very front from the very first race of the season. And if that happens in Melbourne, then the championship narrative everyone expected at the start of the year might change much sooner than anyone imagined.